Altcoins are extremely volatile, and that's why it makes it hard to trade them. That's one of the biggest problems I'm facing while being into the altcoins, having an altcoin portfolio. And that's why I've created this video with a simple step-to-step guide on how to buy the dips on those altcoins. The market can be very harsh, as we have seen an 80 or 90 or 99% correction if you're in meme coins. And that has been taking place since the first and second quarter of last year, which was the last sort of run that we've seen on the altcoins. And that is probably a very painful period if you are investing into the altcoins, having an altcoin portfolio, which is hard to sustain. But if we put it into perspective, you might really think we're not going to go back up at all, but that's not the case. What has been happening in the previous year isn't likely going to happen in the next year. I keep on repeating that, but usually basing your decisions on something that has happened is the wrong thesis. You need to look forward instead of looking backwards. So markets can be reversing, and they tend to provide some really good windows of opportunity. And that's why we are here going to be discussing the first steps of buying the dips on altcoins in these videos. Firstly, I'm very happy to not be into altcoins since that recent high in April. I've made the decision slightly later, although on significantly lower valuations, and I'm still down a lot, which is something that I can handle. But if your portfolio is down 80 to 90%, I can understand that it's not the easiest period to be in. But if you are into altcoins and are looking to get more content out here, supporting my journey would be great through subscribing to this YouTube channel. I'm going to make more content in that case. Anyway, let's first look at the bigger picture. The cycle has been disastrous. And as I've previously shown, there's a case of markets completely vanishing away. And in that sense, we have had a pretty heavy correction, the heaviest one in this entire cycle, where in the case of optimism, we've seen multiple 400% runs, after which we've also been seeing a 70 to 90% correction. Side note though, retail isn't here as the markets have been going down massively. You can see it on the Google searches. Although, as you can see, being interested here in altcoins is actually going to yield you the highest possible return, which is always measured from the lows, and retail is likely going to jump in the moment that the markets have already been running. And it's actually funny because the best time to step into the altcoins is at the lows because they do not continue to go down. And if you jump into altcoins at a higher valuation, there's an increased risk of it going back down to the lows. And that is where retail starts to step in. And that's why it's so hard to make money. Now, in that case, that is what we call the maximum financial opportunity. And maximum financial opportunities are always very clear in hindsight. It's super hard to do it at the right moment in time. Same with trying to make the actual peak or selling the actual peak. It's almost impossible to do so. Now, as we are still in a bear market, and even though in a bear market, optimism has seen these runs, in a bull market, it can be quite similar. So in a bull market, we are actually having cases, like for instance with Chainlink or with other altcoins, that we are having 40 to 70% corrections. And with Chainlink, that's even a bigger cap. Back in the previous cycle, it wasn't. If we look at bigger caps than Chainlink, for instance, Litecoin, we can see that we have 30 to 60% corrections, which are relatively shallow compared to Chainlink. Now, as we have seen a massively strong bear market taking place, where are we in this cycle? And that's why I've made this beautiful technical analysis in which I've added an arrow. I made a green box and I said, here, that's where we are, which is the period of 2019 2020, because we are at the bottom of ETH versus Bitcoin, which then makes us the same period as the previous time, which was September 2019. And as you can see in the chart, we are about to have a lot of upsides still yet to be brought to us, which means that we had the first small run in 2024, We've given back everything. Some altcoins have been given back even more, which is normal. I've seen this in 2016 and 2017, but it means that there is still 12 to 24 months of upside to come. And that brings me to the first key principle of this strategy, which is if a large cap is in your portfolio, then my strategy would be to start buying back into it after a 25% correction all the way towards 60%. If it is a mid cap, let's say top 30 towards 200, I would use the same practice of stepping in at 30% all the way towards 70%. And for small caps outside of the top 200, I would use the practice of buying in at 40% correction all the way towards 75%, as those corrections can be significantly wild. And in the most obvious case, you won't be 100% allocated into altcoins, so you can always add some more. But as long as the markets are going to move upwards, you start to de-risk yourself and have more flexibility. So let's use this principle in practice and start showing it on the charts. Now, as we know, the actual first key principle, it's time to start using this actively in our portfolio. And there are two principles that we need to look at, or actually two big problems, which is one, we are never going to sell the actual peak. And that is something we need to make sure of. There are a lot of people that are going to measure their all-time high as a reference for their portfolio. And that is the first recipe for disaster. If you constantly keep looking at what your all-time high was in 1 second, then you're going to live a miserable life. Ultimately, it's just providing a percentage return year to year and making good decisions with your portfolio. So we are not going to be selling the actual peak. Secondly, we are never going to be fully allocated again into the markets. And that is probably a bit unusual because you feel like once the markets start to really heat up, that's the moment I want to be fully into the markets. But that's actually the moment where the altcoins have already been providing a massive return, which I've been yielding. And then I just want to de-risk myself as the chances of the altcoin falling back into those lows are significant. So let's tackle those both as I don't really care about the peak or the bottom. I just want to be allocated. And by being allocated, I'm going to make life-changing money, or at least that is my goal. And that's also why I'm going to de-risk at some point. Secondly, I think that higher valuations for altcoins are going to yield more risk, and therefore I don't want to be fully allocated. And that's why we have some examples in the sense that if we look at the previous cycles for Chainlink, for instance, you can technically see that we have seen those corrections taking place where we had anything between 40 to 70%. And in all fairness, it doesn't really matter if you were allocated here at the start, that you start selling here in between after a 6 to 10x. The best case would be that you start or that you sell entirely at the peak and that you're actually buying back into the low. But it's hard to really measure when that low is going to be and when the peak is going to be. And usually it's going to be heavily influenced by your emotions, where your emotions are going to say, I want to get out of this position at higher valuations. As very likely during this period, people were saying Chainlink to $100. Well, on the other hand, if you really look at this chart, it is just a moment that you need to get out of it, especially since in the weeks after, we had a correction of 70% in just a matter of 1 month. And if we look at Ether, we have the exact same practice. So you need to be fully allocated into a position at the low, and then the higher it starts to become, the more you want to de-risk yourself until the entire show starts to rotate again. And that's actually a key principle that we're going to be using over the years of this channel, where we're also going to be continuing to build the actual portfolio. Now, when we look at the current portfolio, I brought 3 examples where I want to start using this practice, which is we have 2 ways of taking profits. One is we are rebalancing the portfolio based on the allocations that we have within the portfolio. So for instance, if optimism is tripling while the rest remains flat, I need to rebalance the portfolio or maybe entirely sell the portfolio because I'm too heavily allocated into one specific altcoin. Therefore, it's providing a certain risk towards my portfolio. The other hand is that if we have a certain take profit level that we mark, then that is going to be the first take profit area. And from that point, I just start taking profits and de-risking myself. So for instance, I don't know how high certain assets are going to go. At this point, optimism is at 75 cents. And as I previously discussed, this entire correction that we had since December has been macro driven. You could also say January, but anyway here has been macro driven. So if we are going to get towards the 180 to $2 level, that's going to be the period where I'm going to start taking profits. If it goes higher, I start taking more profits. And then the next high, which if it's going to be at $2.60, that's going to be the period. Now I'm going to move this a little bit. So if we have a peak at $2.75, and we have this as a big altcoin at this point, my first orders are going to be substantially lower, which is 35% towards the 60 to 70% that I've discussed. Anything in between, I'm not interested into getting it into there, because as I see with the previous examples of the markets, it will give massive corrections. In this case, we have seen multiple 70% corrections, and in between of upwards runs, we have also seen multiple 40 to 60% corrections. So I just try to be maximizing my returns in the beginning, start taking profits out of it, and then moving it back into the asset once it has those big corrections. The same goes for something like Tau, where we're currently already up 2 to 3x. Once it starts to breaking out of these highs, and this is the actual asset that is not really losing me money, that once we get into the area of breaking this high at around $800, I start getting myself into taking profits and rotating it towards other assets, which I've already been doing slightly. And then again, I'm going to use the same metric, which is, in the case of Tau, after 25% correction, I start buying myself back into it. And the exact amount of buying back into it, I'm going to discuss in this series of educational content. But as I said, you asked me about how should you be using this strategy to be buying back into the asset. I wanted to bring you the first guide into moving back into it. Now, if we look at something like Wormos, the final one, if it goes towards this high at 42 cents, first of all, I'm going to open a bottle of champagne and enjoy the fact that we are not down anymore. Secondly, if it gets there, I'm starting to take profits. I discussed this before, but with these type of coins, with the volatility that is included into smaller caps, which Wormel is right now, the first order that I'm going to be putting in there, if it's going to peak at this level, is going to be 40% lower, right? So that's at 25 cents. I'm for sure going to see comments from you guys saying it won't be dipping that far. That is the standards that we see during rallies, and during the dips, we are standard going to see comments of people saying you shouldn't be buying into the asset, it's going to die. But there's a prime question that we need to ask ourselves that we are going to tackle on this YouTube series, which is if we want to place those orders, we need to be in stables. But perhaps we also want to be into ETH or in Bitcoin and continuing to maximize our returns. So that is something we are going to tackle into our next videos. Which problems are we facing using this strategy? Every strategy has its downside, and in this case, we, as I just discussed, we require to place our orders in stables, but perhaps we want to be positioned into ETH or Bitcoin. And that's a topic we will be discussing in the upcoming videos, as we are making a series out of this topic to provide more education behind this current get wrecked strategy, which is likely going to turn around into an altcoin portfolio that is yielding an actual return. So I think that that's going to happen, and I keep on saying that if I truly believe in it. Ultimately, I think that being fully allocated into altcoins at the low makes a lot of sense, especially from hindsight. And that's actually the best moment to be investing into altcoins. Well, it's also the moment where everybody's going to say it's not the best moment. But in hindsight, it will not be giving you any downwards momentum at all. So that's actually the moment where you want to get into it. So it's going to be confirmed in hindsight. Trading altcoins is very difficult. However, it also explains that we can simply not stay fully allocated once the altcoins go up, and that there is more risk involved into holding those assets, as the chances of corrections have increased. And that's why I keep on explaining being too early into positions is easier for me than jumping into an asset that has already been moving upwards while it's conflicting my emotions. So I hope you have enjoyed this update. I'll see you again in the next one. Ciao. During these markets, I'm always looking for opportunities to build my portfolio, and OKX is bringing you an opportunity. They are the first fully licensed exchange in Europe with the lowest fees. And to help you a little bit with your portfolio and to celebrate this milestone, they are giving away up to 50 euros in Bitcoin if you sign up today on the exchange. Signing up can be done within 5 minutes, and if you deposit 100 euros worth of crypto, you'll receive the first 20 euros in Bitcoin. Start rebuilding your portfolio today. Go to the link in the description or scan the QR code and enjoy up to 50 euro in Bitcoin.